kind of works. This is like, I guess what you'd consider my man cave, so it's a little messy back there. It's where all the magic happens. Not that kind of magic. So, I'm sorry, Ricoh. For those of you who known me, who have followed me, one thing that's always been consistent, not much has been consistent, let's be honest. I really enjoy small cameras. I love the Ricoh cameras. I love the GR21. Back in the day, it was one of my first favorite street photography cameras. I feel like I have to be closer. Do you want to see more? No? I love Ricoh cameras. But I'm sorry, Ricoh. And Ricoh users. Ricoh Mafia, is that what it's called? Basically, the story goes like this. A couple of days ago, I was watching a documentary, and that documentary was about Daido Moriyama. And most Ricoh users look back at Daido Moriyama as being like the sort of godfather of modern, out of focus, slightly tilted photos of things that are very normal, but then pushed film and lots of contrast and all that kind of stuff. And basically Ricoh has become synonymous with the type of photography, and especially in the street photography world, which is fine. I contribute to some of that myself. But the thing is, we've got to talk about, well, there's something we have to talk about. If Daido Moriyama was 19 years old today, and he's growing up in you know, Osaka, and he was walking the streets and thinking about taking photos or whatever. I know he didn't take photos at 19. It's not really my point. But if I asked most people, most photographers who know about Daido Moriyama, if I said, so what camera do you think he would use currently if he was a young guy today taking photos on the street? People always say the Ricoh GR3, the Sony RX100, whatever pocket cameras are around. But I think that's all wrong. During the documentary I watched, Daido Moriyama said the reason he used Ricoh cameras was it was the smallest barrier between, and I'm paraphrasing, the smallest barrier between the idea of taking a photo and taking one was found in that camera. And photographers of the time, they didn't think of those cameras as real cameras. They were toys or pocket cameras, family cameras, this type of thing. If you consider the same logic, the camera that represents the smallest barrier between the thought to take a photo and the actual taking of a photo is not a Ricoh. Do you know what it is? I bet you have one. It's a phone. Yeah, because think about it. You carry it all the time. You bring it to situations that you would never carry a camera to. It's always there. And as Daido Moriyama said in that documentary, the smallest barrier, again, paraphrasing, between your moment where you want to take a photo and the actual taking of the photo, I think is represented by the phone camera. And I've long been an advocate of using phone cameras. But I also used Ricoh cameras along the way because at some point there was a difference between the quality I would get between an iPhone 5 and the original Ricoh GR. It was a big difference, big enough difference that I would still use the original Ricoh GR if I had it on me. That gap has gotten so close with things like portrait mode, and I know it sounds funny, but it works. It doesn't really matter what phone you have. They all have these features in some form or another, in some name or another. Using your phone more to take photos is actually a very positive thing, I think, and people should try it more. The biggest complaint I always get when I say this to people is it doesn't feel like a real camera. It bothers me that my phone doesn't feel like a real camera. Well, in the 1990s, people, quote-unquote real photographers, didn't think about those Ricoh cameras as being real cameras. They didn't feel like a real camera. It reminds me a little bit about the same argument where a real camera has a viewfinder. So when somebody says that to me, like if a student says that to me, I always ask them like, so why? Well, what is it you need the viewfinder for? And they always say something like, well, it's easier to frame. Well, in fact, it's not really easier to frame with a viewfinder. LCD is larger. You can hold it further away from your face. Easier to see if you have glasses. Less strain on your eyes in a lot of cases. So a real reason would be something like, for me, like when I use a viewfinder or when I want a viewfinder is like in a super sunny day when I just can't see the screen. And yeah, there are times where that happens. for sure. That aside, there are very few situations where I think a viewfinder makes sense, and your phone has the biggest LCD of all, so in my opinion, it's probably the easiest to frame on. So getting that hurdle aside, the next thing people always say to me is like, well, other than that, you know, people will talk about low light. The funny thing is when somebody asks me, or when somebody tells me like, oh, you know, I can't use my phone camera in low light, but then when I look at their photos, they use a flash half the time on the Ricoh, or they're in like the Ricoh forums complaining about how there's no flash on their GR3. Doesn't it stand to reason that in that case, your phone flash works perfectly fine? Really does. Try it once. Just try it and see what it looks like. Take a photo with your phone flash. Process it in the same way you would with a Ricoh. In fact, in that case, you end up with quality very similar because your phone doesn't have to shoot at ISO 3200 when it doesn't want to. All of these things, I think, I'm not saying don't buy a Ricoh. Ricoh, I love you. If you want to send me a camera, I'm perfectly happy to try one out. My point is more like, don't shun away from using your phone. So like if you're outside, and say your Ricoh's at home on the charger, you're walking to work, or you're at work. Like for me, I'm a teacher, if you don't know. So I'm teaching and one of my kids does something really funny or stupid. Chances are even the Ricoh is not gonna be in my pocket if I'm there at that moment. But my phone will be. And lots of people will say things to me like, oh yeah, you know, yesterday I saw something really cool, but I only had my phone. Well, that doesn't have to be a mindset. Only having your phone shouldn't be a mindset. Take the photo. Learn how to use the phone's, let's say, constraints to help you artistically take a better photo. Frame differently because because you can't rely on portrait mode. Use the light differently because you have to know whether the highlights or the shadows look better with a phone. If you really want to use that photo for something, there are apps, iPhone, most Android phones shoot RAW natively. If you're really worried about the quality of what you can do to the photo after the fact, it's possible to shoot RAW. If you're gonna butcher your photo and make it look like a super high contrasty black and white photo, you're better off starting with a JPEG, to be honest. It'll save you a lot of time to get to that butchered look. And I say that again, like, you know, I'm not saying it as if I'm guilty of that, so I can say it, right? Is that how the internet works? I'm probably in trouble, right? Moral of the story, use your phone. If there's a moment where you don't have a camera, don't be afraid to use your phone. Learn to use it. Take advantage of its positives and its negatives. Life's too short for you to like go home and think, oh man, that would have been a cool photo if I only had my camera. When you actually did, in fact, have a camera. Food for thought. Peace. You know, I've tried really hard to stop doing this. In Korea, when somebody takes out a camera, default pose is peace. So, peace. 안녕하세요. 저는 조시입니다. 반갑습니다. Ricoh, 사랑해.